Anyone who's spent a night in the deep woods knows the feeling. It's that moment when the sun dips below the horizon and the forest transforms. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow cast by the campfire becomes a question. Most of the time, the answer is just the wind or a deer. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes you realize the feeling of being watched isn't just paranoia, and you learn far too late that you are not the apex predator out there. This happened to me 5 years ago, a solo trip that was supposed to be about peace and reflection. It ended up being about survival. I'm an experienced backpacker. I'd decided to take a 3-day trip into the Sierra National Forest, off the beaten path. I found a perfect spot to make camp, a small hidden meadow by a clear, fast-running creek. It was completely isolated. For the first day and night, it was paradise. Just me, my dog Buster, a big goofy golden retriever, and the immense silent wilderness. The second night, things changed. Buster, who is usually the most relaxed dog on the planet, started acting strange. He'd been lying by the fire, but he suddenly sat bolt upright. His ears perked, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He was staring intently into the dense wall of trees at the edge of the meadow. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, my hand instinctively going to the handle of my hatchet. I scanned the darkness, my headlamp cutting a weak beam into the void. I saw nothing, heard nothing, but Buster wouldn't relax. He stayed rigid, his growl a constant low hum. An hour passed like this. My initial unease had blossomed into full-blown anxiety. I was about to call it a night and retreat to my tent when a voice drifted out of the darkness. "Hello? Is someone there?" It was the voice of an old man, thin and shaky. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Buster erupted into a furious volley of barking. "Easy, boy," I said, my heart hammering. "Hello?" I called back. "Who's there?" A figure emerged from the trees into the faint glow of my campfire, an old man just like his voice suggested. He was small and frail, wearing old, worn-out hiking clothes and leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick. He looked exhausted and lost. "Oh, heavens, thank heavens," he wheezed, shielding his eyes from my headlamp. "I'm so sorry to bother you, son. I got turned around. My name is Frank. I must have taken a wrong turn hours ago." My guard dropped a little. He seemed harmless, but Buster was still going ballistic, straining against the rope I'd clipped to his collar, his hackles raised. "Hey, shut him up," he said, his voice suddenly sharp and irritated, losing its frail quality for a second. It was jarring. I managed to calm Buster down, pulling him close. "Sorry about that. He's not used to strangers out here." "Can't be too careful, I suppose," Frank said, his wheezing, grandfatherly persona returning. "Mind if I warm myself by your fire for a minute? My old bones are chilled." What could I say? I couldn't turn away a lost old man. I offered him a seat on a log and a cup of coffee from my thermos. He gratefully accepted, but his eyes weren't on the fire. They were on Buster, who was now lying at my feet, still emitting a low, constant growl. "He doesn't like me much, does he?" he said with a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. His own eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, and they had a strange, flat intensity. We made small talk. He said his friends were waiting for him at a campground a few miles north. He'd gone for a short walk and gotten lost. His story had a few holes, but I chalked it up to age and disorientation. But then he asked a question that made my blood run cold. "So your dad's still working down at the shipyard?" he asked casually, taking a sip of coffee. I stared at him. I hadn't told him where I was from, what my dad did for a living. I hadn't told him anything. How did you know that?" I stammered. He just smiled, a thin, tight-lipped smile. "Word gets around, small world." His eyes flickered back down to Buster. "Dogs have a good sense of things, you know. They can smell when something's not right, when something's hungry. He can smell it on me." I stood up. "I think it's time for you to go, Frank. The campground is north. If you follow this creek, you'll hit the main trail." His smile vanished. "I don't think so," he said, his voice now a low, chilling rasp. It had none of its earlier weakness. "I think I'll stay. I like it here. It's quiet. And that dog of yours? He's going to make a lot of noise. That's a problem." He set his coffee cup down, and with a speed that was utterly impossible for a man his age, he lunged, not at me, at Buster. In his hand, which had been hidden in his pocket, was a long, thin, wicked-looking skinning knife. I reacted on pure instinct. I kicked the log he'd been sitting on, sending him stumbling. Buster, no longer held back, shot forward with a roar, a 70-pound blur of teeth and fury. The man screamed, a high-pitched, thin sound of rage and pain as Buster's jaws clamped down on his arm. I didn't wait to see the outcome. I grabbed my hatchet, cut the rope to my backpack to free myself, and ran. "Buster, come!" I yelled. I heard a sickening thud and a yelp of pain from my dog, then the sound of him running, crashing through the underbrush behind me. I didn't look back. I just ran, blindly, through the dark forest, branches whipping at my face. We ran for what felt like hours. I could hear him behind us for a while, keeping an unnervingly steady pace, shouting things in a voice that was no longer human, high-pitched, chittering taunts. We finally lost him when we hit a steep ravine and scrambled down it. Buster had a deep gash on his shoulder where the man had kicked or struck him, but he was alive. We hid at the bottom of that ravine until dawn, shivering with cold and terror. I never went back for my gear. I walked 10 miles in the wrong direction just to be safe, finally stumbling onto a logging road where a truck eventually found us. I told the rangers a bear had attacked our camp. What else could I say? That a frail old man who knew my life story and moved like a predator tried to kill my dog? The last I heard, the rangers had found my abandoned campsite. They also found a weathered missing person poster from 2 years prior, tacked to a tree nearby. It was for a hiker who had vanished in that same area. He was a young man. He'd been camping with his dog. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I were always looking for the next big hike. We'd conquered half the major trails in the Pacific Northwest, so when our friend told us about an unmarked shortcut to a supposedly breathtaking waterfall in the Cascades, we were all in. He gave us vague directions on a napkin. "You'll see a fork in the main trail about 3 miles in," he'd said. "Take the one that looks less traveled. You can't miss it." We found out later that you absolutely can miss it, but you find something else instead. The hike started beautifully. The main trail was well maintained, the air was crisp, and the scenery was incredible. We found the fork in the path, just as described. The left path was wide and clear. The right was narrow, overgrown, and looked like it hadn't seen a boot print in years. "This has to be it," Sarah said with a grin. We took the right path. For the first mile, it was tough but rewarding. The forest was older here, the trees bigger, the moss thicker. But then we started to notice the silence, the birds, the insects, the rustle of small animals. It all just faded away, leaving a dead, heavy quiet that felt like we'd walked into a soundproof room. "Is it just me, or is it too quiet?" Sarah whispered, her earlier excitement gone. It wasn't just her. The air was still, and there was a strange metallic tang to it. Then we saw the markings on the trees. They were strange spiral symbols carved deep into the bark. They weren't trail markers. They felt like warnings or territorial signs. Our compass was useless, the needle spinning lazily in a circle. Our phones had lost service miles ago. A prickle of real fear started to crawl up my neck. "We were lost," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. We turned around, but the path we'd just walked, it looked different. The trees seemed to have shifted. The light was fading faster than it should have been. It was then that we heard it. A woman's voice crying for help. "Please, is anyone there? I'm hurt." It came from deeper in the woods, off our path. My first instinct was to go help, but Sarah grabbed my arm, her face white with fear. "Don't," she whispered. "Listen." I listened. The voice was wrong. It was a perfect loop. The same inflection, the same desperate plea, every 10 seconds. It wasn't a person. It was a recording, a lure. "We need to get out of here," I said, and we started walking, then jogging back the way we came. The crying voice faded behind us, but it was replaced by something worse, a new sound. It was my voice. "Sarah, wait up!" it called from the trees to our left. I stopped dead, my heart in my throat. I hadn't said anything. "Don't answer," Sarah hissed, her eyes wide with terror. "That's not you." We started running, and then her voice joined mine, echoing through the silent woods. "Mark, I'm scared!" it wailed from behind us, a perfect, terrified mimicry of her own voice. It was hunting us. It was learning our voices, trying to separate us, to confuse us. We ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, our only guide the desperate need to escape the sound of ourselves. We burst out of the woods and back onto the main trail, so suddenly it was like breaking the surface of the water after being held under for too long. The sounds of the forest, the birds, the wind rushed back in. We didn't stop. We ran the full 3 miles back to the trailhead, not looking back once. We got in our car and just drove. We never told our friend what happened on his shortcut. How could we? How do you explain being hunted by a thing that steals your voice? I did some research later on local forums, looking for any mention of that area. I found one old deleted post. It talked about a part of the forest the locals call the sound trap. The post said that if you hear a voice in there that you recognize, you have to run, because if it gets your voice right, the next thing it tries to get right is your skin. There's a reason park rangers tell you to stick to marked trails and designated campsites. It's not just for your safety, it's for theirs. It's to make sure you don't find the places that aren't on the map, the places that don't follow the same rules as the rest of the world. My friends and I found one of those places. We called it the glitched outpost because we didn't have a better name for what it did to us. There were 4 of us, me, Ben, Chloe, and Liam. We were camping in a remote section of the Adirondacks, car camping, but far from any official site. On our second day, we found an old, abandoned fire lookout tower on top of a high ridge. It was a rust bucket, probably from the 30s, but the view was incredible. At the base of the tower, there was a small, dilapidated ranger's cabin. We were exploring the cabin, which was mostly just rotten wood and dust, when Ben found the logbook. It was on a small desk, remarkably preserved. The last entry was dated 1948. It was strange. Most of it was just weather observations, but the last few pages were a descent into madness. The ranger wrote about a strange hum that came from the cabin's well at night. He mentioned seeing visitors who weren't there, their faces wrong, like a badly rendered image. The final entry was just one sentence, scrawled in a frantic hand. "They want me to stay. They say there isn't room for me back there anymore." We were all sufficiently spooked. Leon, the skeptic of the group, laughed it off. "Old-timey cabin fever," he called it. The well was right outside, covered with a heavy stone lid. As a joke, Liam decided to shout into it. "Hello down there!" he yelled. We waited, and then the echo came back. But it wasn't Liam's voice. It was deeper, distorted, and it said, clear as day, "We're full." We all froze. It was probably just weird acoustics, but the creepy logbook had us on edge. We nervously laughed it off and headed back to our campsite, a few hundred yards down the ridge. But the atmosphere had changed. The woods felt watchful. That night, things got weird. We were sitting around the campfire, and Liam was telling a story. He was in the middle of a sentence when he just stopped. He froze, his mouth half open, a blank, vacant look on his face. He stayed like that for a full 10 seconds. "Dude, you okay?" Ben asked, waving a hand in front of his face. Liam blinked, then looked around confused. "What?" "Sorry, I just spaced out, lost my train of thought." We thought it was weird, but let it go. An hour later, Chloe was getting something from her tent. She walked into the tent and then, a second later, walked right back out as if she was on a loop. She did this 3 times in a row with the exact same movements before she finally came out holding her jacket, looking confused. "Whoa," she said with a shaky laugh. "Major deja vu." It was like reality was stuttering, skipping like a scratched CD. Ben started to panic. He said he felt like we were in a dream. But the worst part was the sounds. We started hearing voices at the edge of the firelight. Our own voices, whispering things we had said hours earlier. I heard myself asking Ben if he'd packed the hot dogs, a conversation we'd had back at the car. Chloe heard her own laughter from earlier that afternoon. It was like the area was a broken recording, replaying random snippets of our time there. We decided we had to leave, now, in the middle of the night. We started frantically packing our tents, our hands trembling. We were stuffing our sleeping bags when we all heard it, a sound from the direction of the old cabin. A woman's scream. It was loud, terrified, and it was Chloe's voice. We all spun around and looked at Chloe. She was standing right next to us, her face pale, her hands clapped over her mouth. She hadn't made a sound. The place wasn't just replaying the past. It was playing the future. We didn't pack anything else. We abandoned our gear and sprinted for the car in the pitch-black darkness, our headlamps bouncing frantically. As we ran, we heard it again, a man's grunt of pain. It was Ben's voice. A few seconds later, Ben tripped on a root and went down hard, spraining his ankle. We helped him up and practically dragged him the rest of the way. We threw ourselves in the car, and I've never been so happy to hear an engine turn over. As I backed the car around, the headlights swept across the woods, and just for a second, standing at the edge of the trees, I saw 4 figures. They were hazy, indistinct, like a video on low res, but they were us, standing there, just watching us leave. We drove all night. Ben's ankle was broken. We never talked about what happened. How could you? We had stumbled into a place where time was broken, where the past, present, and future were bleeding into each other. We called it the glitched outpost as a joke, but there was no humor in it. We left a part of ourselves on that ridge. Or maybe the place just made a copy. And sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night with a terrifying thought. What if the us that drove away wasn't the original? What if we're just the echo? Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at the comments section, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon. Good night.